So imagine you're quarantined in a building with maybe something like 400 other sick people and enduring a disease that is certainly a killer for the time period. That sounds really bad. And it was really bad. There's a wonderful story from Joseph Plum Martin's memoirs from the Revolutionary War. And in the year 1777, he is assigned, his whole regiment of 400 is assigned to undergo the inoculation for smallpox. And smallpox at the time was a great concern, that it would go through the army, that it would cause great portions or great percentage of the army to be sick at once and to make them a completely ineffective fighting force, and therefore they would lose the war immediately because of this. And a lot of the folks in North America hadn't been exposed to smallpox, at least as much as the British soldiers at the time. And so it was a bit more dangerous to the American forces versus the British forces during the war. And it was a concern of the leadership, and so they purposefully inoculated large portions of the army to have it at little bits at a time, so that they didn't so they weren't all sick at once. Here's a part of his reading. He says, I was soon after this transaction ordered off in a company with about 400 others of the Connecticut forces to a set of old barracks a mile or two distant in the Highlands to be inoculated with the smallpox. We arrived at and cleaned out the barracks, and after 2 or 3 days received the infection. He talks, this particular journal or memoir is fun because he tells the story in a kind of a rambling sort of way. It isn't told like we would tell a story today. Sometimes he'll kind of throw in random facts or random things that happen to him. So it's just like, sitting down with somebody and hearing a story where it kind of goes in places you don't expect it to go. And he explains here that the house that was adjacent to the barracks with a barn that had all their provisions, the house burnt down, and they were greatly concerned that all their provisions that were stored in the barn were going to burn up. And there was even concern that a cat that had caught fire was going to run in and catch the barn on fire. And the barn roof was a thatched roof, which I thought was quite interesting. But the barn didn't burn down, even though the house did. He says, I had the smallpox favorably, as did the rest. Generally, we lost none, but it was more by good luck, or rather kind providence interfering, than by my good conduct that I escaped with life. He finishes up his bout with smallpox, and about 16 days or a little bit more after they were confined, they were released back into the population. So that was a very quick bout of smallpox. It was apparently very light. One of the things he did was he went fishing. And they didn't apparently have fishing equipment, but he was in the water and it washed his smallpox off, and he counts that to his quick recovery from the smallpox, because it's a very kind of a long-lasting, debilitating thing, and you're still very contagious. So he gets back into the general population after his bout with smallpox, but his troubles are not over. He immediately gets a bad case of dysentery, which you do not want to have. And then right after that, he has boils all over his body. And truly, even sort of 9 months later, much later in the book, a little bit later in the book, he talks about having caught the itch at the same time as that he got the pox, but he had to deal with that all summer long, and it wasn't until they go into winter quarters the next winter that they're able to deal with that. So he not only was constantly dealing with the problem of not enough provision, not enough food, which is just always an issue with them, but he had all these different disease situations all happening one after the other. So my takeaway from Joseph Plum Martin here is that no matter the circumstance, no matter how just terribly difficult his situation was, whether he didn't have food, he didn't have clothing, disease, loneliness, despair, he always has a funny story to tell. Somewhere in there, something is happening in that time period. He's remembering, he's able to tell that story and is able to relate this situation that is not positive, but in a positive way. I want to be able to look back on, the situation that just about everybody is dealing with right now, which is, sort of isolation and maybe a lack of something. And if anything, it's sort of lack of a job, lack of something to do, which is just very, very difficult to deal with. And so many people have that problem right now. I want to be able to look back on this positively in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is, and be able to remember the little funny things that happen that make it possible for us to just keep going. I hope you can look back on some of these things and find those interesting things that are happening in this time period. Remember them. And I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for coming along with me as we study and look at these just truly interesting, helpful things that we get right out of the 18th century. Have a great weekend. Thanks for watching.